Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SDSU and NDSU Extension Winter Lunch and Learn Continuing Education Series. I'm Prairie Walkling, Master Gardener Field Specialist based in Rapid City. And if you would like to type, hopefully you can see that. If you'd like to type in the chat today, your location and the temperature where you are, that would be great. And today is our final presentation in the series that we've offered, and thanks for attending from both sides of the state line. And our purpose was to talk about some of the soft skills that help you all be successful volunteers. So I hope that we were successful in doing that, and the session will be recorded, and recording will be made available on the YouTube playlist. And if you need that link, just let me know. And if you have questions today, you can type those in the chat, or you can use the Q&A box with the question mark at the bottom of your screen. And we welcome those questions. And today we're delighted to welcome Kristine Lang on pulling together presentation pieces. And I'll give a bio for Dr. Lang. Dr. Lang is a South Dakota State University Assistant Professor and Extension Consumer Horticulture Specialist based in Brookings, South Dakota. She holds a PhD in Horticulture and Sustainable Agriculture from Iowa State University, where her research focused on sustainable vegetable production. Her horticultural career has included working in private sector, university, and nonprofit organizations across 4 Midwestern states. Dr. Lang works with citizens across South Dakota to empower master gardeners, celebrate public gardens, champion local food and cut flower production, and address herbaceous plant questions from aster to zucchini. Welcome, Kristine.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on what side of the river you're joining me from. It's always great to see all of you virtually. And thank you to everyone who's been engaging in this educational series. When Prairie pulled many of us together to think about how to design this, there were a lot of topics that we were excited about. And I really do hope that you have found this informative and you've seen ways that this can help you serve as educators and resources in your communities. Again, our goal as SDSU Extension Specialists is really to make sure that you feel confident in reaching out to your community and answering questions and providing resources. And we also want you to have that research-based information. So in some ways, maybe I apologize so much that I had to cancel in January, but in some ways, maybe it's kind of a poetic ending that we're pulling the presentations together as a way to end this series. As questions come up, Prairie, if there's something that is very specific to a certain slide, please let me know. And if you want to just unmute and stop me, that would be great. And if it's more general questions that we can discuss at the end of the presentation, I'm happy to do so as well. For anyone joining from the Watertown area, you'll notice that this presentation is familiar from a few years ago. This is a topic that I'm really kind of passionate about. And again, there are lots of ways to think about how to build a presentation. And so this is one set of suggestions for how to go about it. And I just want to add the disclaimer right now that similar to how Lisa Moreau's talked specifically about, speaking styles and advice from a Toastmasters perspective, I'm, giving a perspective on how to give extension presentations and how to gather the information. If you are really excited to dig into the details of what tools and widgets do I use in PowerPoint or Canva or other, presentation design tools, I'm just going to say right now that I'm not going to go into the details of that. I'll have a few tips and suggestions just based on some of the things I do. But this won't be a deep dive in how to navigate Microsoft PowerPoint. There are some great resources out there that can help you do that. There's some awesome templates that have been provided by Prairie. And just know that there have been some discussions about some future training on some of those topics to help you dig deeper as well. So we're really going to kind of focus on how do you plan for and gather the information. So step one, you've been asked to give a presentation. This is something that happens a lot in my extension world. And I'm just going to be the first to say that no two audiences, no two venues are ever the same. I have spoken to groups such as what you can see here, that the Pennington County Master Gardeners always host over 200 people every spring. So I've spoken to, audiences of over 200. I've spoken and given tours to groups of people where maybe it's one person or two people. And each of those things can have their own set of intimidation factor or nerves. And sometimes it's easier to speak to the larger groups because it's kind of just a sea of faces versus a smaller group. You can see everyone one-on-one, and that can be a little more nerve-wracking. And I'm going to tell you right now that I still get nervous. Sometimes it's the most random of presentations, and I'm like, oh, I'm nervous about this one. And I just try to take a deep breath, and I'm someone who's greatly comforted by having a printed copy of my slides in case the computer crashes, in case I have a blank, just so I have a physical thing there. I know it wastes trees, and 95% of the time I never reference, those printouts of my slides or the notes I've jotted on them. But just the fact that I have it sitting there on the podium or on a table in case something goes wrong or I need to look at something just makes me feel so much better. So think about those ways that you can, take notes or prepare that make you feel better. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about practicing presentations because I know Lisa Moritz maybe talked about that with speaking styles. I'm a big believer in you should do what works well for you. Some people feel best if they practice an hour-long presentation start to finish by themselves in front of people, get feedback multiple times. For most of my presentations, that tends to actually make me more nervous and bumbly. So I tend to prefer to have an outline and walk through the slides in my head and think about what I'm going to say. And that's a practice style that works for me. But again, I think you should consider what works for you, and also think about your fellow master gardeners, your friends, your clubs, other master gardeners in your community, or someone you could connect with virtually. And if you would like to practice, think about practicing with a fellow master gardener, and think about ways that you can give feedback to someone who's practicing that is constructive and helpful. Like, oh, did you realize that you say a lot? I know I sometimes say a lot, and I'm going to tell you right now, my poor husband learned he says a lot when he was lecturing as an adjunct instructor, and he had a sign language interpreter for a student who was hard of hearing in his class. And the sign for is something like a handshake. And my husband suddenly realized how much he said So it was a really good speaking practice or feedback for him. So, there's things that we do when we speak that we don't even realize. Like maybe oftentimes, I didn't today, but you'll notice oftentimes I put my hair in a ponytail because I'm a hair flipper otherwise. So maybe it's up to you guys to watch how many times I flip my hair now. So do things, that make you comfortable. If you hate wearing dresses, don't present in a dress for the first time ever. You're just going to feel fidgety and uncomfortable. So those are just some of the things I think about when it comes to presenting. So here's some of the other questions that, you always want to ask if someone invites you to present, especially if you're not familiar with the organization or where you're going, just so you can get, as much information on the front end. Again, it goes a long way in helping you prepare and feel more comfortable. So what is the presentation format? Do they want a PowerPoint? Do they want you to bring a hands-on demonstration? Is it just a roundtable discussion where they want you to sit at a table and be willing to answer questions? Do you need to have prepared remarks or not? How much time do they actually want you to spend talking versus asking questions? That can be really, really important. And And sometimes there are mix-ups. I've had a situation where I thought I needed to speak for 45 minutes and it was like, oh no, you actually need to speak for 90. So I really tried to stretch things out. Or I've had a situation where, oh no, I thought I had an hour, but you really only have a half an hour. And then it's like, okay, what can I cut at the last minute? And sometimes those things happen. There's honest communication breakdowns. But if you're ever uncertain, don't be afraid to ask. It never hurts to triple check what date you're expected to speak. Um, just some of those details. So if they do want a formal presentation where you're showing something on a screen or where you're bringing visuals, how big is the space? How many people are going to be there? If they want you to bring show and tell items, are you going to be in front of a room of 200 people and people in the back are going to have no idea what your show and tell is? If that's an issue, think about, how can you pass items around or maybe recruit a fellow volunteer to come with you and have multiple of the things you're trying to show? Like, let's say you're showing tomato transplants. Can you have several cell packs of those tomatoes and have a few volunteers walk around the room to show people? If you are doing something projected on a screen, it's really nice to ask what the screen size will look like, or even ask, do you have a picture of the venue so I can get an idea of the layout? Or especially if it's a large event, a lot of those events usually have an aerial map of the room layout, and it's totally okay to ask for that too, so you can kind of get a sense of how people are going to be watching you. Who's providing the technology? Do you need to bring your own computer or bring your presentation on a flash drive or email it to Prairie ahead of time? What does that look like? And never assume. I have done this before and it's gotten me into trouble. I have had a few cases where I've just brought my presentation on a flash drive all willy-nilly and not grabbed my laptop. And then it's like, oh no, we thought you were bringing your laptop. So just, ask those questions and be upfront, like, you know what, my laptop's kind of slow. I would prefer that you provided your laptop so we know that it works with the projector. Like, it is okay to say, but just be upfront about those things. I think all of that goes a long ways in helping think about presentations as well. I showed this particular slide because this was one of the first events I ever did in 2021. And it was the complete opposite weather of today. It was 100 degrees, a jillion% humidity. Everyone was just pouring sweat. It was like a fun on-farm field day, but it was so hot. And you can notice up there that the screen is pretty tiny. For an on-farm field day, this is a pretty good setup in all things considered. I've seen some way crazier setups. But so we had a tiny, tiny screen, kind of a long, narrow space. And one of the folks who presented ahead of me had a lot of really, really, really teeny tiny fonts. And unfortunately for, this person here, right here, and maybe even these people right here, I don't think they could read the font. I certainly couldn't standing in the back. And then to make things even more fun, there were one of those big, huge farm fans trying to get some air movement, which was very, very, very necessary, but also very, very, very loud. So if you are someone who has a quiet voice or, can't project your voice really loudly, don't be afraid to ask, will a microphone be provided, or how are we going to deal with audio? Because it was also very hard to hear in this space. And so by the time I was presenting, my presentation was essentially me dripping and pouring sweat while shouting at the top of my lungs. But my understanding is people could hear about half of what I said at least. So again, I'm not saying that you're going to be put in this unique of a presentation scenario, but it is something to think about. And again, I think there's ways to overcome those things. This is one of the reasons that my presentations tend to have a lot of pictures. If I do have a graphic that has tiny font, I try to, in nice big bold text, give you the website where you can actually go and read that at a later date. Or if I have a lot of tiny text, I'll try to, call out the key highlights for people so that they don't have to read it. But, just a good presentation practice is having really nice big font, and less font is better. Now, I have had a student of mine push back on me because she is more of a visual and someone who learns by reading. So do consider that balance of, if you're going to minimize your text, do you have links to resources where visual learners who, learn by reading can go and read more? Do you maybe have a supplemental handout with more things written down? Or are you encouraging note taking? Or what are you doing so that people with a variety of learning styles can learn? Because we want to be mindful of accessibility. We want to make sure that people can hear us, see us, understand us, which brings up speaking pace and speed is another thing to consider. And I know I am the first person who can be guilty of talking too fast sometimes when I get really excited about the topic. So I am far from the perfect example of how to present. And I think we're all always learning. So who is your audience? What topics are you presenting about? So, you might be asked to give a talk to elementary school students. Most of us know that elementary school students are a little bit wigglier than an audience of our Master Gardener friends, although sometimes we can be really wiggly people too. Are you talking to a group of farmers? Are you talking to a group of people who have gardened before? Are you talking to a group of people who have never gardened in their life? In the photo here, I'm giving a presentation to high schoolers. And this was an example where we did kind of tours and demonstrations. And I think I gave the same talk 6 or 7 times because small groups rotated through at the Southeast Farm Field Day. And I will just be the first to say, if you're going to give a talk multiple times, have a very good outline of what you're going to say and follow it for all 6 or 7 times that you have to do that rotation. Because by the 6th rotation, I didn't know my name. I didn't know what group I had told what. I would make a terrible, just awful high school teacher. I have no idea how my mother-in-law teaches the same topics multiple periods over a day. Because I tend to mix up who I've told what. So I'm not good at repetitive presentations. But this was an example of a repetitive presentation with high school students. And again, there were some, every group had a few people who were really excited and really engaged. And then there were other people who are like, you know what? I'm here to look at the cattle or do the hands-on soils rotation. I'm not super excited about tomatoes. And sometimes that happens. We might have people who aren't super excited about our topic. So just, especially if it's a general audience or an audience that's more removed from your gardening topic, think about ways that you can connect it to their real life or everyday life. That can help kind of build some of those connections. And I'll actually be the first to say that some of my favorite groups to give tours to actually are the little kiddos because they ask the best questions. They notice things that the grown-ups never even thought to ask about. So those have always been some of my favorite tours to give. All right, so I want to spend quite a bit of time on how to find, discern, use credible information. This is both, the information that you want to use for your presentations, as well as photos, graphics, images, because I think that can be the stumbling block. You might think to yourself, if you're asked to give a presentation on roses, well, I'm not the expert on roses. You know what? I really don't consider myself the expert on roses either. And I know I've had to help give some rose webinars because we really wanted to learn more about roses. So I tend to approach any new presentation with, okay, what can I learn along the way? For example, I recently gave a presentation for SDSU Extension Crop Hour about how to sell to wholesale markets and thinking about packaging and what might need to change on a commercial farm to scale up and be able to sell to grocery stores or hospitals or larger buyers versus just setting up a table at the farmer's market. And I didn't know all of that information. I actually had to do quite a bit of research and look at some different resources, but it was really fun because by the time the presentation building process was done, I had learned some new information. And I also learned along the way that I planned for about twice as much speaking time as I actually had, AKA I had way too much content. So while it doesn't directly tie to credible information, when you're thinking about your presentation time, maybe practice a few slides or think about how long you talk about different topics. I tend to give myself 1 slide per minute, or if it's a lot of photos and I know I'm going to go through them quickly, 30 seconds per slide. So if I come into a presentation for 60 minutes and I have 150 slides, I'm not getting through that presentation. I have also learned the more comfortable I've gotten with presenting, the more I tend to slow down and share extra things on each slide. So I really, for a 60-minute presentation, should keep myself to 40 slides. And I sometimes do a good or a bad job of following that rule. But it's something to think about so that you're not finding way more information than you need. Or if you are, maybe set that stuff aside and realize, okay, I might volunteer to give the next presentation versus just being asked because I have so much good information to share. Because I think we've all sat in presentations, and I know I've done it to you all, and I apologize in advance, where we've thrown too much information at our listeners and we all leave with really mushy brains and we're very, very tired because it was too much information. So just something to think about. Now, as a scientist, I'm going to start with what are the best sources of information and how can we go back from there. So the best sources of information are always going to be peer-reviewed journal articles. This is where the work that myself and Rhoda and our graduate students do, collaborations with Robin Butterbaugh, or the work that John Ball is doing with his graduate students. When we do grant-funded research at universities, we are expected to send that manuscript, that write-up of our research results, to some form of a peer-reviewed journal. And when it reaches that journal, there's usually an editor who says, like, yes, this makes sense for our journal, or you know what, you did a project on tomatoes and you submitted this to the peer-reviewed Journal of Baseball Science. Like, we're probably not the right fit for you. You should really send it to Horticulture Technology. And I'll go, oh yeah, that was goofy, wrong email. I probably wouldn't do a mistake like that. But the point is, there are pretty much scientific journals for a wide variety of gardening, woody plant, tree, forestry, agronomic topics. The editor then sends that paper on to 3 to 5 other scientists. And most of the time, this is done blind. Sometimes it's done blind both ways, where they'll actually remove the names and credentials from the manuscript before the person who reviews it gets to see it. And it, without fail, it's usually reviewed blind in the sense that when I send a paper to a journal and 3 to 5 people review it, I don't know who those people were. Occasionally I can guess, just because sometimes it's a very specific field and there might only be a certain number of people who are asked, or sometimes I'm asked to provide some names of who should review it. But each of those scientists is reviewing that paper and picking it apart. They're criticizing in a nice way. Usually they're criticizing your methods. They're asking, why did you use this plot size and not that plot size? Why did you study Cherokee purple tomato and not beefsteak tomato? They might ask all sorts of questions. And they will then tell that editor, accept this, don't accept this, or accept it if they make the edits that we've suggested. And usually accept this with the edits we've suggested or some flavor thereof is what happens. And then, myself as the scientist submitting that manuscript, I have to then address those questions and concerns. And that's part of that peer-reviewed process. And that is kind of the gatekeeper to make sure we're not just throwing science into the world all willy-nilly, and we have people reviewing that science. I know that students, master gardener volunteers, everyday people, you might be like, oh, but peer-reviewed journal articles, they're so dry, or they're not for me, or they're not accessible. And I see that Prairie's laughing. Even sometimes I feel that way. Sometimes scientific writing can be a little bit dry. But spending time at least reading an abstract, which is usually the big picture of this is what we did, and this is what we learned, and this is what it means for everyday people, is a great way to get started. And I love looking at the tables and figures, because that's where you're going to really see, did trying this new treatment make a difference? Which compact tomato cultivars are best for container gardening? So might also feel like, oh, there's not a lot of science that's done for gardeners. You'd be surprised if you started to, look up some things related to the words houseplants or container gardening or other gardening topics that you're interested in. You might actually find quite a few really cool peer-reviewed articles. And the great thing right now about science is more and more of our journals are going open access, which means you should not hit a paywall. And I don't want to overpromise anything, but if there's an article that you really need that would help you make a Master Gardener presentation and you're having trouble accessing it, please let me or Prairie know, because chances are we could request it through the SDSU library. And you're an affiliate of SDSU, and I would be happy to help get that article into your hands. So if you ever hit a paywall that says you must pay $30 for this article, don't pay it. Contact me or Prairie, and we will help you. I direct you to the American Society for Horticulture Science because they have 3 open access journals that have been open access since 2020, I believe. So all of their recent articles are free, available to download. You can read all of it. And so those 2 primary journals are called Horticulture and Hort Science. And Horticulture especially tends to be a lot of like the really fun research projects that I think many of you would enjoy reading about. And if you go to the ASHS Horticulture website, you can search in the journal, you could just put in container gardening or propagation of hostas or any of those types of questions. And you might find some really, really interesting information that would help you make your presentation. And this is just one example, shameless self-promotion, of what a peer-reviewed journal article looks like. And you can see that this happens to be one that I did on grafted tomatoes. And so if you ever want to see articles that I've done, you could go to ASHS, and if you click on my name, you can actually see the articles that I've written. You could see articles by Rhoda Burrows. John Ball's work goes in a variety of forestry and entomology style journals. But if you look up any of our names, and especially if you run it through like a Google Scholar search engine, you could find research papers. Or if you're ever just curious about any of our research as extension specialists or the work that Amanda Bachman's done with insects for her PhD, don't be afraid to ask us. We are happy to talk to you about our research, especially if it helps you with the presentation. There are lots of search engines to look for peer-reviewed information. Through university libraries or local libraries, you might see things like EBSCOhost or PubMed or other sites that help you search through peer-reviewed journals. I'm just giving you Google Scholar because it's very, very accessible. Now, with any journal search, you want to be very, very careful if it takes you to a journal that's super specific, like the Journal of Grafted Tomato Science. I might look at who the journal editors are, and if all of the journal editors are Kristine Lang and the names of her cats, I would be very, very concerned. Extreme example, but there are some journals out there that are rather sketchy. So if you ever have questions about, is this a credible peer-reviewed publication, any journal worth its weight in salt is going to have its list of editors, and it should list those editors' credentials. And if they are from, Kristine Lang University of South Dakota, that seems like a pretty obscure university. I might not trust that journal if I were you. So don't be afraid to look into people's credentials, because having good scientists who are putting good things into the world in terms of their research studies is really important. So our journal articles should reflect that. And there are lots of ways to search, credibility of journals and impact factors and all of these things that I'm supposed to worry about as faculty. But I don't really want you to get bogged down on that. I think start by looking for good information and be a detective. Look at who are the authors, where are they from, are they, and again, there's lots of great work from international authors as well, but don't be afraid to cross-check, like, does this seem like a legitimate university, regardless of what country it's in, because there's awesome horticulture research out of Europe and awesome horticulture research out of the Asian countries. So there's some things they've been working on, overseas that we're just catching up to in the United States and vice versa. So that exchange of information is what makes all of us better. All right. So another excellent resource is research-based books. And I realize that, everyone has a different book budget. Taking advantage of local libraries is really important, or maybe your Master Gardener Club or Master Gardeners in your community, you could get together and, kind of start a resource library if you don't already have one. But it's important to remember that we've got some great books from SDSU. So we've got Trees and Shrubs by John Ball. We've got South Dakota Weeds, which has kind of this green paper cover, and I'm looking at my bookshelf behind me because it's usually sitting right there. Those are some great identification and management resources. You all have probably heard me say this a million times, but Herbaceous Perennial Plants is one of my favorite books. Alan Armitage is a retired faculty from Georgia, I believe. And it's like a love letter to all of the herbaceous perennials. And I should also add that depending on what book vendor you look at, you can get a lot of these books used as well. And I'm someone who buys a lot of used books because I don't mind if a few pages are wrinkled or crinkled, and then I'm not, paying for some publisher to have to print a new copy. And I'm kind of, reducing the waste stream, so to speak. If you are giving a presentation on annuals or answering a lot of questions about annual flowering plants, I really like the Ball Red book. Yes, it talks a lot about how to grow these things commercially in a greenhouse, but for most of the crops, at the end of the section, they talk about, okay, what happens when it goes to the garden center, and what advice should you give to consumers when they're caring for it in their garden? I think this can be a great book for learning more about annual plants, and also learning about the temperatures and the temperature and fertility requirements that they need while growing in the greenhouse can give us a lot of information for what they might need in the garden as well. And the University of Georgia Extension Growing Plants Indoors with Success, that's kind of a downloadable book. I don't actually own the print version of it, but it was a PDF that I was able to download online. Again, there are lots of great books out there. There are farmers and gardeners who have written really, really interesting books. But if the information starts to feel like it's deviating too far from science-based information, pause, bring it back, and, take that advice with a grain of salt and just be careful about perpetuating, especially gardening myths. So when you're looking, you'll notice that my books here do have a very strong university research bias. So all of these have editorial teams that include universities and scientists. I know that Ball Red Book is actually put out by a commercial company, but their list of editors and contributors includes a lot of scientists from a variety of universities. So I own books that are from universities and scientists. I own books that are from gardeners and farmers. I think they both have a place in our world. It's just if we get, people who are just writing a book for the sake of writing a book, we just want to, again, evaluate that information through a critical lens and see, what sources are they citing? Are they basing their recommendations on research? Again, there's a lot we can learn from experiences, but we need to balance that with science so that we're not perpetuating things that are misleading or anything that would be unsafe or put a gardener in danger or at risk. We never want to do that. All right, so we've moved from excellent to great. Peer-reviewed extension fact sheets are another great resource. These go through a less rigorous review process than like a book or a peer-reviewed publication. Typically, our peer-reviewed extension fact sheets are reviewed by, one or two colleagues internally at the university. Or, for example, for some of my fact sheets that I'm working on right now behind the scenes, I've asked Esther McGinnis from NDSU to review them. So we have usually a smaller peer review process, and it's usually 2 or 3 peers that we know. So it's not necessarily blind, which isn't a bad thing. The more eyes that we can get on any type of publication, the better. But, there's a wide variety of peer-reviewed fact sheets through SDSU Extension, through NDSU. Esther has some great resources, especially on pollinators and native plants that are based on her research. Often with extension fact sheets, they might be based on some of the research that we've worked on. That's not quite, maybe a piece of it made it to peer review and a piece we wanted to be more accessible. Extension fact sheets are usually also meant to give, nice step-by-step instructions, or here's what this means for you, the gardener, or you, the farmer. So extension fact sheets are usually practical information. Again, not really highlighting any one university. It's just some of the systems I know. But they're pretty much any university with an extension service is going to have some form of a space where you can search for their fact sheets. SDSU, we tend to just have it searchable on the website, and I'll get back to that in a moment. Iowa State and Purdue, I know for sure, they have what are called extension stores. And a lot of their PDFs are downloadable for free. Occasionally, you might see that a PDF is $1 to $5 to $10 to download, just because they put, maybe they needed to cover staff time that it took to research and make that fact sheet. So you might occasionally hit a paywall for a fact sheet. And if there are ever concerns or issues with that, again, don't be afraid to reach out to me or Prairie. Perhaps there'd be some funds that we could use to make sure you get that resource. I would rather not see you run into any stumbling blocks with a really good resource. And you're often going to see on extension fact sheets, there should be a nice source of resources, and you should also see, who worked to prepare it. And often on that last page, you might also see who peer reviewed it. And again, different universities have different standards for their peer review process, whether it's internal or external. But if I have peer review of my fact sheets or reports, I always try to cite that. You'll usually, for my sheets, see authorship, and then either right under the author name, special thanks to so-and-so and such for reviewing this, or in an acknowledgement section is where you would find that information. All right, so now we've downgraded to good. Extension websites and articles. These are usually things that, I'm going to be honest, we're trying to write a little bit faster. We might be doing in collaborative groups. It might be like, oh no, the derecho went through and now we need to write about it like yesterday. So I'm not saying that we don't do a good job. I'm just saying that typically we might ask one colleague to peer review it before it goes on the website. Or if we're a large authorship team, we make sure everyone looks at it and then it goes on the website. So it's just, again, the amount of review is kind of what downgrades some of these things as we go through it. But you can get, again, a lot of really good information for presentations from extension websites and articles. And I have certainly found a wealth of resources from my colleagues and other universities. Again, it never hurts in your presentations to highlight our SDSU extension resources. And you can tell that this is an old screenshot because it's dated May 10th, 2021. And it has an old logo, and it has the old SDSU Extension Garden hotline information. So this is a great example of what not to do. It is good to get current screenshots, make sure you're using the appropriate logos, things of that nature when you're doing your presentations. But it doesn't hurt to end presentations with a slide like this, like, okay, I told you this much information. Here's my contact information that I'm comfortable giving out. But here's another place you can go if you have more gardening questions after I depart. Paying attention to things like the Extension Garden and Yard newsletter might help give you some inspiration for what to talk about, especially if it's like, oh, we're inviting you to the library in July to talk about a timely topic. And you're like, oh, I don't know what I should talk about in July. Well, maybe you want to scroll through the Garden and Yard newsletter archive and see some of the things that we were talking about in July, and that might give you inspiration on what your topic should be. All right, so this is where I'm going to kind of pause and talk a little bit about how to navigate the extension websites. Our website, we have a wide range of information on a variety of topics. And sometimes folks can land on the homepage and be like, oh my gosh, how do I find that information? So I'm going to ask that Prairie just drop the general extension website in the chat. And You are welcome to follow along if you'd like. And Prairie, are you now seeing my extension website instead?
Yes, we see it.
Awesome, great. Okay. Well, folks, first and foremost, if you're on the SDSU extension website, a great place. Yep.
Excuse me. Annie did ask, how old is considered old for resources?
Ooh, great question. All right, let's pause and ruminate on how old is considered too old for resources. If it has the SDSU Campanile logo on it in like kind of the old tan paper with the blue, that's pretty old. Oh man, it can be so hard. I would say for our extension website, I'll just give this as an example. We're looking at things from 2018 and 2019, and we're cross-checking that and seeing if it needs to be updated at all. So I would say looking for information that's been updated in the last 5 years is great. If you're looking at peer-reviewed information, the last 10 to 15 years is usually good, just because from the time we do the project to getting it reviewed to getting it published, that takes time. So those things are a little bit more timeless. I've been asked, do I need to buy the newest edition of the book or can I buy the second newest? Honestly, for things that are like plant ID books, like, how to identify various trees or identify various herbaceous plants, how we identify those plants hasn't maybe changed that much. So, one past edition maybe isn't a big deal. But do remember when it comes to plant ID, plants also get reclassified a lot. So just note that you might want to double check that your scientific names are the most current because things do get reclassified. Kristine Lang and I run into this at McCrory Gardens with some of our annual trials that, okay, it was in this family and now it's in this family. So there just are those subtle changes that happen. And there also is research that's really foundational. It might be that this thing was discovered or we first learned about this soil health property in 1960. So I think there's a time and a place to like look at some of the old research. I certainly have looked at some of the old reports in the SDSU Open Prairie repository when I wanted information on the Bonanza tomato. I'm not going to find current publications on the Bonanza tomato because it was developed at SDSU before the 2000s. So it's, an earlier development in terms of the tomatoes. I want to say the Bonanza tomato was in the 80s or 90s, and I'm guessing someone on here will remember. But, when it comes to some of these garden releases or information when something was developed or discovered, that information is going to be older. And that doesn't mean it's bad because that's when it first became known to scientists. So I know, Annie, that maybe was a lackluster, wishy-washy answer, but it really does depend. If it's a topic where we know there's a lot of research, hydroponics, lighting, things like that, I would expect those resources to be 5 years or newer because that field of science is changing quickly. Honestly, raised beds, how we mulch our gardens, the effects of microplastics from using woven landscape fabric, that's a field that's evolving rapidly. There was just research about microplastics and the life cycle of some of our plastic garden mulches out, like this month. So again, think about, is it a topic that's been around for a long time that people are really studying? And again, if you're not sure, kind of peruse the internet, check out Google Scholars, see what you can find and get a feel for where did people, kind of during what decade or era did people spend a lot of time talking about that? All right, there we go. Played with my hair just for you all. Caught myself about halfway through. So here's our Extension Garden Yard website. If you ever just want to see what articles Amanda Bachman has written, you can click on her name, scroll down here where it says also by Amanda Bachman, and you can click view all by author. And you can see any event she's ever been a part of, and any article. And you can see that she has 9+ pages because she's collaborated on a lot of entomology articles. That's one example of how you can find information. You can search by topic, and I love the vegetables page because Rhoda Burrows has spent a lot of time talking about a variety of vegetable crops and how to grow them. So you can find all of that information here. And let's say you're like, wait a minute, I didn't see tomatillos and I want to find tomatillos. You can just type the word tomatillos and spell it correctly. Tomatillo. There we go. It didn't like the S at the end. And it brought me to an article about tomatillos. And it should have brought me to Prairie's tomatillo article because that was what I was trying to do. So you can see here, usually with our articles. So this is an article about how to harvest and store tomatillos. And if you scroll down here, you can see, wait a minute, Prairie and Rhoda just wrote an article about how to grow tomatillos. So you can often see at the bottom of the website if there's any complementary articles. Or I'm really interested in poinsettias. And I'm just going to hit search. And now I have all of the topics, some of which have been written by me, Robin, Dr. Graper. I can see everything related to poinsettias. I would have more than enough to do my gardening presentation at the library on poinsettias. So you might be surprised. I too am sometimes surprised by the topics that can be found on the Extension website. So as SDSU Extension Master Gardeners or as NDSU Extension Master Gardeners, depending on where you're listening in from today, I would kind of kindly ask that you start by seeing what resources we have to support you. And if you're not finding things, I totally understand. We don't have all of the resources, and there's things that some universities do better than us and vice versa. But I would ask, start with us. Start with your corresponding, volunteer home base and see what information you can find from our websites, and then branch out from there. All right, let's get back on track. I hope that helped you get a feel for our website just a little bit. I had mentioned Open Prairie. Open Prairie is where research reports from our research farms live. It's where we can find research articles that date back to the 70s, 60s, etc. So when I was really interested in learning more about SDSU tomatoes that had been released way before my time, I looked on Open Prairie. Another resource on Open Prairie is the Native Plant Archive. So this was developed by a faculty member who has since retired, but you can pretty much look up any native plant and see information about it. And this is something that the SDSU Native Plant Initiative actually cross-references as well. So again, if you're looking for research reports, cool tools for native plants, or some of that old foundational research from SDSU, Open Prairie is a really fun place to look. All right, now I'm kind of going to veer out to what are some other neighboring university resources? Sydney Trio and I love this website from the U of M. It's called What's Wrong with My Plant? And they have a variety of plants and decision diagnostic trees. So this can be a great way if you're giving a presentation about any of these specific plants to get some more information about them, maybe talk about some of the common disease issues. And this is a reminder, again, on, just from a geographical standpoint, it's not to say that Cornell University or the University of Florida don't have great information, because they do. But it is great to start with our most closely related neighboring universities. So for our East River friends, looking at the University of Minnesota, of course, NDSU, many of you are on the call, hello. Iowa State University and University of Wisconsin are great places to start. The University of Nebraska has that east-west river divide and kind of feel like we do. So they can be useful for both sides of the state. For folks West River, Colorado State just has some awesome resources, especially about gardening in dry conditions, rocky soils, doing things like xeriscaping or preparing landscapes for fire prevention, dealing with those crazy, very, very hangry deer that you're combating over there. Colorado State has great information. Montana State, University of Wyoming, again, University of Nebraska, also great resources. I just happen to be the most familiar with Colorado State. And then if you're ever interested in, just for your own personal use or giving presentations on anything related to cut flowers, Utah State has a nice extension service all around, but they have a really fun set of resources related to cut flowers. And I reference that often. Now, again, when we're using any of these resources, the further we get from South or North Dakota, it's just important to cross-check, what might change in terms of seasonality or growing conditions that we need to be mindful of. All right. Also, botanical and trial gardens are great resources. They can also be great sources for photos, so that is something else to consider. All right. Now, how do we just generally search for information? I couldn't find any peer-reviewed topics. I own no books. All of the university websites let me down that I went to directly, and I need to widen my search. The internet can be a great but terrible place. There are lots of gardening blogs. Again, some of them have very interesting creative ideas, and many of them, unfortunately, perpetuate myths. Many of you have heard me talk about Epsom salts and how we should not just go sprinkling it in our gardens like glitter. It is not going to solve all of our problems. And so I sometimes take issue with gardening blogs that act like things like Epsom salt is going to solve all of our problems. So please use caution on general internet searches. Again, you might see some cool ideas on Facebook or Instagram or Pinterest, but please go back to the source and please cross-check that with a scientific source or a university source. So one of the easiest ways to kind of sift through the internet is whatever question you have. And again, I think this works in other search engines as well. I just happen to know that it works very well on Google. You can type your question or your topic, and then you use the word SIT : so the 2 dots, EDU. And that tells the internet search engine, I only want websites that end with EDU. You can also do this for org or gov if you ever are doing a search where you only want like nonprofits or what have you. But for the sake of this exercise, if you type in your question and then put site EDU, it should, in theory, only give you universities, or it should push those to the top. So that really helps you sift through information. And I use this life hack on a daily basis. Again, I don't have all the answers to all of the questions that you all have, or farmers might call and ask me. There are times where all of us have to look things up as well. And we, dig into the research, we look at other university resources, and this is one of the fastest ways to kind of sift through some of the things that might not be helpful. So if you walk away with nothing else, start with peer-reviewed resources and sift through all of the gardening blogs by using credible university resources instead. All right, as we wrap up, let's talk about citing your sources. And again, I know this was a lot of information. Prairie does have a PDF copy of this handout, and I believe she already distributed it to you. And if she didn't, she definitely planned on it. And I am okay with you sharing this with any of your friends, family, community members who weren't on this call, anyone that would benefit from having this information. So there is a wide variety of ways to cite resources. Sometimes people will do it right on the slide. Sometimes they'll do it on a slide at the end. I tend to do more on the slide citations. And the goal is that people have enough information to figure out where you got your information. And again, a lot of this also applies to any articles that you're doing. Even if you're doing an article for the newspaper, see if they'll let you cite your sources, because you're just going to look so much more credible. Or if you're doing a newsletter article for your club, or if you are collaborating with me or Prairie or other specialists for something for the extension website, we really like to see these citations. These are examples from extension articles that I put on the website, we really want to have names, year, title, and if we have a website that we can link to, excellent. So this is a great way you could curate all of this as the last slide of your presentation and just call it, here are my references and resources, or on your handout, if you want to give people a print handout, give them this so that people understand how they can find the information. You'll notice I often get a little lazy, or I just want it to be super easy, and I will just put the website on the slide, or I will also put a QR code on the slide so that there are multiple ways for people to access that information. Where is the author listed on an extension website? Great question. User experience will vary. At SDSU, we tend to put that right at the top, which is awesome. University of Minnesota, they always put it in a gray box right at the bottom of the website. NDSU, I haven't scrolled through for quite a while. It might be at the bottom or the top. You'll see things when it comes to photos or small articles. Sometimes they might just put the name at the bottom of the blurb. So you do sometimes have to hunt. Worst case scenario, let's say it's an SDSU extension press release. We don't, and you for some reason were citing that, or it's an article that's very general web content. You might not find the name. If you've hunted that website and don't see the name, it is okay to say Utah State University and the year. If you cannot find a year that it was published, you could put ND for no date. And then the last thing you could put at the end of your citation with the website was the date that you accessed that information, which is something in peer-reviewed journals we often have to do, is say when we last accessed the website. But just some things to consider. And again, I want this to be something you can reference back to. Here are some examples of how I have cited things on my slide. Again, none of them are maybe the perfect example, but I'm, just trying to show ways that I've pulled information. So this is a table that I pulled from a publication. This one didn't have a date, and I really should have put the last name before the date, but that's neither here nor there. But I had the last name, the date, the fact that I couldn't find one, University of Wisconsin Extension, and then the article was called Late Summer Planting Legumes. Many of you have seen this presentation. I, for example, have just encouraged people to dig deeper on a resource. And so I put the title of the resource and the university where that resource could be found. You'll notice I often do kind of a deep dive or to learn more type call out, where I'll call out a specific website. And so if you have the direct website, I tend to worry less about names and dates at that point, because as long as you've triple checked, especially in an old presentation, you've triple checked that all of those links still work or the QR code still works, you should be okay. And again, here's another example of how I cited a photo. We just want something so that we know I, Kristine Lang, did not take this photo or make this graphic or create that table or figure. So this is another example of that. This is a table I used often. Again, many of you have seen this one. It's an awesome table. I didn't create it. I want people to know that Lott and Hammond created it in 2013, and it was in Waterwise Vegetable and Fruit Production. And they actually shared that it was adapted from the USDA NRCS. So again, you just want people to know you did not create this, and where could they actually find the original copy. And this is an example where I was talking about some specific research findings, and I give people the website so they can go read that research report themselves. All right. And this is another example. You all have maybe seen this before, where I often end a presentation with a list of recommended resources. And, in this case, I didn't put the websites, but I gave enough information that if you put this term into a search engine, you should be able to find that resource. So that was my goal there. This is an example of a handout that you might create to accompany a presentation. Again, if you're like, oh my gosh, there's just way too many charts or tables or figures, or there's just so much cool stuff that people should read, it is a-okay to do this type of a handout. And it's something that I'll be the first to admit, I wish I took time to do more often for more of my presentations, because I think this is a really nice takeaway. And again, there are SDSU extension templates that you can gather from the website or Prairie can share with you that can be used to make making that handout really easy. I spend not a lot of time making this pretty, and I just use the extension font and move forward. All right, we are coming to the end of our time. I will just share that there is a variety of ways to find photos. If you have your own photos, my first recommendation is to use a flash drive or, a cloud transfer and get them onto whatever, tablet or computer that you're using. And, anytime if you take a lot of photos of plants, anytime you can label your folders so you can find photos again is great. Or using iPhoto or Google Photo, which is very searchable. Those are also really helpful. But these are examples of photos I took at Maderi Acres with a presentation and article in mind. How do we get pictures we took into our presentation? In PowerPoint, there is a button here where you can go into insert and you can go pictures and you can go from this device and you can sort any folder that you want. I did not take these photos, but I would be able to open, if I hit insert this photo, it would show up on this slide right now in a second. There we go. There's a photo of some people canning, and I do not have permission to share that photo because it's not mine. So this is an example of one that would not go on my presentation because this is from an extension specialist who was not me. But that's an example of how you get photos into your presentation. If you're looking for photos from other sources, again, looking at university websites, this one just happens to have a lot of really beautiful plants photos, and they always say the source so you can cite the person and the date. If you're looking for pictures of plant diseases, APS has an awesome image database. And I know I'm keeping Prairie very busy. And again, it's important to credit your photos. And if you look at your handout, you're going to see some examples of how to do that. I'm going to skip crediting photos just in the interest of time, and I'm going to encourage you to look back at your resources. I am going to share this with you. And the question is, how do you get all of those screenshots? I take a lot of screenshots of websites. Prairie knows this. Many of you know this about me. Again, I don't promise to know how to do it in Mac, but if you're using a Windows device, there is a tool called the snipping tool. For me, it shows up on the bottom little dashboard of my computer, or the bottom taskbar, if you will. If it doesn't show up there, search the programs or apps and type the word snipping tool or screenshot and see if it's there. If not, you should be able to download it. But I will click on that snipping tool right here and I'll hit new snip. And there we go. We're gonna have slide inception. It'll go there, and then I can hit copy, and then I can paste it back into my PowerPoint. So that is an example of how to use the snipping tool. I do that often for sharing websites. And then I'll usually, again, give a QR code or list the link so that you can find that website. So again, maybe one small tech tool that you'll walk away wanting to use more. All right, so ending a few minutes late, I just want to give you my parting wisdom. Again, focus on science-based information. Be consistent in your presentation. Try to use a consistent template or a consistent font. You'll notice that the SDSU extension template focuses on like dark blue and black text on a white background, kind of some of those basic things. If you're labeling a lot of photos, try to put the label, always at the bottom, or maybe sometimes it needs to be at the side, but just trying to have some consistency with your slides is going to be less visually what's going on for your users. Less is usually more. Some people love using animation in PowerPoints. I do not, because if you use too much animation, suddenly if you bump a button, things start flying and disappearing and zooming and moving, and suddenly you kind of lose track of what's going on. So I've had animation go sideways on me, so I tend to avoid it. I prefer a nice, simple, boring slide that I know when I click this button, the information is going to show up. Budget enough time to speak. So, I previously, when I gave this talk, I think I did take 75 to 90 minutes. So I should have cut a little bit more. So do as I say, not as I do. You can always edit, especially once you give a presentation or if you practice with your friends or your family or your pets. Pets are great to practice presentations with. You can see that my cat Juan is a very attentive listener. You can always edit. And there are ways to hide slides. So let's say you do have a presentation built for an hour. Don't just delete all of that material, maybe save a new copy or hide the slides. But, you never know when you might be asked to give the hour-long version again. And be human and have fun. I think, ways that you can insert your personality or, you'll often see with me, I do share a gardening photo with my pets or a gardening photo with my niece, and my sister-in-laws have all given me permission to, include their children in my presentations. Anytime you can share your own gardening pictures or your own experience and blend it with that science-based information, I think it's just really going to resonate with your audiences. And again, all of us at SDSU Extension and NDSU Extension, whether it's the specialists, the staff, your fellow club members, your fellow master gardeners across the state, we're all here to help you. And my hope is that some of you walk away from this today, actually all of you walk away from this today and think about, okay, I'd feel really comfortable giving a presentation on this, this, and this. Start there. Start with the things that you're comfortable on and branch out from there. You never know what kind of presentations or education you might be providing a few years from now. So with that was everything I had for you today. Prairie, were there any questions that we wanted to tackle?
I don't see any.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully this means people feel more empowered than they do overwhelmed. Again, please use this handout. Feel free to use my examples for citations and resources. And remember that you've got templates through SDSU Extension. My hunch is that you might have some templates through NDSU Extension to help you out. And never hesitate to reach out with any questions or if you're seeking advice on presentations. I have had master gardeners say, hey, I've been asked to talk about this and I'm having trouble finding resources. Could you help me? I would be happy to do that. So again, we wouldn't be able to do what we do and reach as many people as we reach if it wasn't for the hundreds of you out there in your communities helping give these presentations and providing a wide variety of educational support. So I truly mean this. Thank you so much for what you're doing to help us as well. All right, Prairie, I'll let you close us out.
All right. Well, thank you, Kristine. I was asked to do a winter sowing presentation at the library. And it just occurred to me that Robin just presented on winter sowing, and I should, check with her. And so this is helpful for me too. Thank you.
Yes. Well, and Robin has a really nice article about winter sowing too. So I know there's resources to support you in your presentation, Prairie.
Yes. And thank you to NDSU for partnering with us and sending this out to their master gardeners. We appreciate you tuning in and, the information that your presenters shared with us. Hope we can do it again. And we also hope that you may want to travel to McCrory Gardens. That will be June 26th and 27th. Kind of similar to what was done last year at the International Peace Garden. So all of you are invited to that, and there'll be more information coming out about that. Kristine, did you want to say anything about that event? Or
I'm just going to say that the June event at McCrory Gardens is going to be really fun, and I'd love to see you all there.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day and a good gardening season. See you next time.